Hello and welcome to the Event Bestie, the show that unlocks the magic of event planning by taking you behind and before the scenes. I'm your host, Tanya Hales. In today's episode, we'll talk about why events need DEI too. Yes, we're still talking about DEI. And I'm going to throw in an extra letter in there too. We'll get to that later on. Today's episode is brought to you by the World Omnipresent Kindness Enterprise, aka WOKE. Let's get into it. I'm going to say the letters DEI and you're going to raise your shoulders to your ears. Ready? DEI and raise. This is the physical reaction many inwardly have when they hear those letters. My goal is not to have your shoulders become your earrings. There is no pointing fingers here. You can also release them, by the way. I want you to finish this episode thinking about the events you might be planning and how you can authentically add diversity to your lineup. The key word there is not diversity, it's authentically. We'll chat about it from two perspectives, from the programming side and the vendor side. I speak from the planner side, the speaker side, the client side, and the vendor side. I have literally been them all. Act 1. DEIR in your programming. One of my favorite Twitter accounts, back when I was on Twitter, and we were all on Twitter, RIP Twitter, was called Manowatch, MANEL Watch, and their partner in crime, Gender Avenger. Their goal was to publicly name and shame events where the panels were all men. And I loved it. It tickled me to no end because we should be calling out every event, any panel that has only one gender on it. Depending on the topic, we will get into that later, but just saying overall, there's no reason for it in the year of 2024. There is no field in which you cannot find a woman working in it. Finance, construction, marketing, tech, medicine, law, you name it, you can find a woman to speak on that panel as an expert, because we know when you put people on panels, they're seen as experts in their field. So when you have only men, you say there are no women who are experts in this particular field, and that sounds like fake news. Some would react sheepishly and promise to do better and actually take action to doing better. Some would react defensively, of course. Remember shoulder earrings? And for others, they just never replied. So it was really telling to see how events were responding to being publicly called out. As a Black woman, I see this happening along racial lines as well. If a woman is thrown onto a panel, she tends not to be of color. Gender diversity is the easiest, and I use that in the bunny ear quotations, problem for many planners / clients to solve. But you have to think outside of just one aspect of diversity, right? Throwing a woman onto a panel of all men is not solving the problem of representation. All you're doing is tokenizing that woman and probably putting her in a space where she's going to be mansplained, she's going to be talked over, she's not going to have the same amount of airspace, and then the people in the audience are not going to ask her the questions, and the questions that they're going to ask her about work-life balance, like you're not doing what you think you're doing by adding the one woman to your panel full of men. The same goes along for adding the one Black person to a panel of all white people. Again, all of this with the caveat of it depends on the topic, but more often than not, it's not necessary. But it is important. And why is this important? Because you're leaving money on the table. More times often than not, when you have a panel of all anything, you are loudly telling people that their money isn't good enough. So if you have a panel of all white women, you are telling Black women not to buy a ticket to that event. Loudly. It becomes very, very clear because you are literally promoting one perspective and then selling one perspective to people who have the same perspective. And so people who don't have the same perspective or the same aesthetics are not going to attend that event. And they're going to see it as something that is not for them, even if it's something very general. I work and have a nonprofit, Black Moms Connection. And the reason why it exists is because the motherhood space was very, very white. And yes, there are clear universals to parenthood. There are things that every parent has to go through. how soon is too soon for a cell phone, how to get them to sleep in their own bed, puberty, all of that is very much across the board. Every parent on the planet got to go through it. But there are specific, unique challenges that come with being a Black parent that white parents never have to go through. Having the talk about racism is a default that I have to do with my son versus it's a nice to do, a maybe to do, and only if they feel guilty in February that they might do for other parents. And the perspective is very different. I'm teaching my son how to be in public, how he engages with his classmates at school. That is not the conversation that is happening in white households. So that is an example as to why people are not going to shell out their dollars to something where they're not going to hear anything that is relevant to their life. So if you listen to previous episodes, people want to leave with something. They want to leave, yes, empowered and motivated and inspired. Yeah, okay, cool. But they also, if you're really good at what you're doing, want to leave with a takeaway, a book to read, or take out from the library. Shout out to the libraries. An app to download. They want to know how they can make their lives better. And if they're not going to hear from people who have lived their lives or have shared lived experiences, they're not going to go. So you're leaving money on the table. Planner hack. LinkedIn is your friend. This is the one time that LinkedIn is going to be your friend. Search for what you are looking for and see what pops up. If you need a director of sports marketing, most profiles have pictures. You will be able to scroll through the people who have that title, and maybe, just maybe, you'll find a few women, you'll find an Asian lady, you'll find a Black man, you'll find some diversity that speaks to the topic that you're trying to put on this panel, but also diverse. However, it is so important to note that not everyone with melanin identifies as Black, so don't just use a picture to fill a checkbox. And you're going to want to reach out to them, get to know them. How do they identify? What are their politics? You're not going to just put someone on the stage without doing all of that vetting. Or you shouldn't put someone on the stage without doing the vetting. I've seen it happen. One of my former clients created an event called Afrotech. It is now one of the largest tech conferences in the US, created for and by the Black community. It was started because the tech industry has a race problem. And companies kept saying there was a pipeline issue and they didn't know where to find the diverse talent. In 2016, that event was 350 people. In 2019, it was over 10,000. And every tech company now flocks to it, sends a team of employees to it, because 1, it made them look good to be there. 2, they could recruit. 3, people could find good jobs. Win-win for everybody. Everyone is happy. But what's super important there is, yes, okay, it's centered for and by Black people. So I'm sure people who are not Black are saying, well, can I go? You can go. Absolutely. It's just not going to center you. It's not going to center your lived experience. It's going to have a roll call for the HBCUs at the start of the day, because that is what Black American culture people do when they're in a space together, right? And if you don't get it, you don't get it. But that's okay, because it's not for you. It's not designed for you. And it's one of very few spaces on the planet that is not designed for people lacking melanin. But people always want to get in their feelings. This is reverse racism. I'm just like, every other tech conference is hella white. But no one complains about that. But they complain when people make their own. You see how that's, the math is not mathing there? And we already know that Tanya and math don't go together. We don't like the maths. So unless the event is strictly to be about entertaining someone, like a concert, most guests go to an event to learn. They want to access the insights from speakers on how to better their personal, professional lives. And if you've done the work to know who your target audience is, you should know who they want to hear from. So you have to be very intentional with creating your event programming. Look at a wide spectrum of people in the industry. And if you think it doesn't exist, put your keywords into Google to make sure that you are right, because you don't want to end up on Mantle Watch. Act 2, DEIR in your speaker budget. So let me ask you guys a question. For the planners in the house who are listening, you don't have to be in your house to be listening, of course. Why is it, or how is it, that so many of us can be so bad at planning? Now, when I say planners, I also mean people who work for companies who are responsible for planning in-house events. I'm going to lump you into that because you have the role and responsibility of doing so. We know Black History Month is in February. Women's History Month is in March. Pride is in June. We know these things. So how is it every single January, February, May, people act surprised that these things are coming? But more importantly, that's when the outreach is done to find speakers that align with those cultural or heritage months. And sometimes even the month of, which the irony is not lost on people when you're doing that. You are going to an equity-seeking group and saying, please give us your labor in this month that's supposed to be celebrating you. And I'm going to ask you in the month that I'm celebrating you in. And then more importantly, I'm not going to have budget to pay you. You, the equity-seeking group that is supposed to be celebrated this month. You see how more math does not math there? And how insulting it is? It's like saying Christmas snuck up on you when the stores have been telling you it's going to be Christmas since October, especially here. The Christmas stuff is put out literally the day after Halloween. So how is Christmas a surprise to you? Listen, I totally get it. But as long as these months aren't changing, and if you work for a company or you're a planner of some sort, these things also should not be a surprise to you. They should be on your radar. It's not new. Christmas, Jesus' birthday was the same day every year. It can't sneak up on you. It just can't. And I know for me, as someone who has been a DEI speaker in the past, who speaks to certain things on the topics of Blackness, that literally is a life that I've lived, where in January and February, it's pedal to the metal and all things and all consuming, and then it's crickets in March. But the funny thing there is, friends, I'm also a woman, and yet when we think about Women's History Month, we neglect women of color. We don't reach out to Indigenous women until it's Indigenous Month. We don't reach out to Asian women until it's Asian History Month. We're both, right? And so it's really important to think this through when you're reaching out to speakers. And it should go without saying, but it's going to be said because we're on a podcast. You absolutely, positively should be paying your speakers. A person who came up in your Google search does not need exposure. Take me, for example. You Google your girl. I've done a couple of things. I've spoken on a couple of stages, been on a couple of TVs. I got to pay rent. You cannot pay it with exposure. What does exposure even really mean? Who are you exposing me to? What is it going to mean, right? A humble honorarium is better than nothing. Stop playing hide the wallet on the first date game with speakers. Ladies, you know what we're talking about here. Don't call them up and when a person says, well, what's the budget? You hem and haw, or you say you don't know, or you don't have one. And then you want them to put in the number first so that you can tell them it's too expensive. Don't ever tell someone that they're too expensive. They are just not in your budget. Those are two very different things. Same words, different meanings. So it's really, really important. But also, women are notoriously bad at pricing themselves in business as entrepreneurs across the board. So you multiply that when you're Black, Indigenous, a woman of color. According to Forbes, a 2018 study estimated that women represent 31% of paid speakers globally, 35% for the United States, and the numbers are even worse for women of color. So when a white woman is getting paid $15,000, but the white man is getting paid $50,000, what do you think is happening to Black, Indigenous, disabled, openly queered? Need I go on? Right? So don't do that. Pay everyone equally across the board, especially if their following warrants it, their expertise warrants it, their education warrants it. All these things go into what makes someone's speaker rate what it is. And many will take a pittance because they want the opportunity. But you have to realize that as soon as they talk to each other, and if they do find out that one is being paid more than the other to be on the exact same stage for the exact amount of time, it's a wrap. You don't want to end up on these internet streets being inequitable to people. Act 3, DEIR for guest experience. COVID, for a brief time, was the great equalizer. Events and event planners not having to worry about flights and hotels, venues and catering, could ask speakers to be on their stages that they had never considered before. But it also meant attendees could attend who never could before, too. Parents are often a group that is overlooked. Many events don't have childcare, breastfeeding rooms, or gender-neutral change areas. Differently abled guests who needed to buy 2 tickets for entry for their attendance can now easily join a Zoom session. Those at high risk for COVID or are uncomfortable at in-person events, neurodivergent, guests who get overwhelmed by all the noise, they also get to play. But now that in-person events are back, people are doing away with the virtual, calling it fatigue. And that is a very narrow-minded point of view. Who is tired? Who is once again being centered and considered first, foremost, and only? I was recently on Threads when someone pointed this out. When a speaker asks if they have to use a mic, the audience is never going to say yes. The person in the back of the room who needs it will stay silent. The guest experience should be put at the forefront, whether digitally or in person. And that last point was really poignant for me because I'm a person who I can project. You know, when you're an event planner, you learn you have to corral people and yell. Be like, "Hi, friends, the bar is closing. Please go get your coats and get out of the building." And do that loudly and proudly and firmly, but kindly, right? It's herding sheep. It's great. So oftentimes I hate using mics. I don't like them. I don't like the sound of my voice projected. Most people don't. I was always like, do I got to use this thing? Very frequently on stages that I've been panelist, moderator, host, all of it. I've asked that question so many times in my speaking career. And it never once occurred to me to think about the person who needs to say yes, but can't. And I was like, thank you for calling this out. And it is now something that I'm going to think about both on the planner side, but also on the public speaking side. I'm not going to be a speaker that asks the audience to give me their accessibility needs. It is my job to use the mic. That is literally my job for the night. So it's definitely something that I've thought about. And also, as I brought up in previous episodes, if your event is during Ramadan, do you have a prayer room for your guests? And even if your target audience isn't predominantly Muslim, what if their partner is, right? Like, you don't know who's coming to your event. They don't necessarily register what they identify as when they're buying a ticket. But to have it means that that one person who uses that one prayer room for that 5 minutes felt included, felt that the ticket price was worth it, and made for a beautiful guest experience for them and everybody else. Act 4, DEIR, in your run-of show. E is for equity, which should also include the other side of your production schedule. The event industry runs on trust. You call your favorite rental company that has to come through in a clutch. You use your favorite caterer that makes the food that you like. But what about the woman-owned print shop, or the queer bakery, or the Black-owned venue? Equity is putting money in the pockets of people that don't think, live, or work like you. Diversity isn't just about gender or even race. It's diverse perspectives, viewpoints, and life experiences. It's really important for you to do the extra step. I get it. Trust me. I get it. Trying a new vendor, you don't know if they're going to show up on time, if they're going to make you look bad in front of the client. There's a lot of risk. I totally get it. But is it any riskier than when you have to try out a new venue and you have to work with a new caterer because that is what is on their on-site list? Is it any riskier than when you're trying to do something in a new city that you don't live in and you just have to trust the venue to give you good advice on who to pick and for decor and for AV and for food, all of that? The extra work that it takes to find a diverse vendor, sure, it's an extra step, but it can be worth it because chances are they're a smaller vendor who has to fight that much harder for the opportunities, which means they're going to go above and beyond to do the work. They probably were going to give you extra food or stay extra long or give you extra support or discount their fees, which they shouldn't have to do. but they're going to go above and beyond than the companies that are just going to take your money for granted. And again, how people self-identify, all you need to do in your Googles is Black-owned caterer, LGBTQ invite company, right? There are so many directories out there for Black-owned businesses, women-owned businesses, LGBTQ plus businesses, indigenous businesses. You can find these things. The problem tends to be is people don't want to have to put in the work to find them. And that is my biggest beef because it's just lazy. And again, I get it. I've been in this relationship. I've been in this industry. I've been in this field for a long period of time on multiple sides of the fence. So I totally understand defaulting to the people that you know, calling up the planner, be like, hey girl, I have an event, here's the thing. I don't have to do any extra work to find someone else. But maybe I should, because I will enrich my own life. I will enrich the guest experience by doing so. And while also putting money in the pockets of a smaller business that could use the amplification. In summary, DEIR, which, did I ever explain what the R is? The R is representation, by the way, if you don't know, is more than just a check mark. And I know you know that, and I know that, and we all know that, but it's become this boogeyman word. It's become a word that means a whole lot that it doesn't. And all it means is attempting to level out the playing field for everybody, giving everyone an equal opportunity. You don't have to give someone your business just because they are in an equity sequin group, right? You don't have to be like, it's Black History Month, I should use a Black caterer. You should use a Black caterer, but you don't have to, right? But when you have the option to lead and you have the ability to do so, are you going to take it? Are you going to build equity on both sides of the run-a show, on the stage, but also in the vendor space? You know, include voices outside of your circle. Do the homework. We have too much access to Google and directories and other platforms, you know, hashtags. Like there's so many ways to find the people that you say that don't exist or that you can't find. Do the homework. Equity and inclusion matters and makes for a good financial return on investment. And for a lot of organizations, businesses, entrepreneurs, big and small alike, the bottom financial line is what matters the most. And if you want a good, healthy one, then you'll think about making sure that you have included everyone to participate at every level of your event.